preparing to live stream the meeting. It's a very interesting class tonight. Very different style than the past few weeks. Not as intense, possibly. Here we go. Okay, so you see it's live on YouTube. I'm going to play the recording again, and now Zoom tells you loud that the recording. Oops. Okay, this meeting is being recorded. I'm curious if it's going to say that every time someone new jumps on to let them know, or if it's just going to be one time. I guess we'll find out soon. L'chaim, everyone. I made a bracha before.
L'chaim.
L'chaim.
So let's jump right in. Mordechai, what are you grateful for this wonderful evening?
What am I grateful for? Lots of things. Everything in general. Right now.
Good.
It was a long day, so I'm still processing stuff.
Okay.
So.
Hope it wasn't a stressful day.
In some ways.
Okay. Well, good luck.
Thank you. Okay.
Joan, what are you grateful for today?
It was a beautiful day. I was invited to a friend's house and we played canasta, and it was just great fun to be with friends. So it was very nice. Yeah.
Great. One day you'll teach me how to play that.
Okay.
I am grateful, extremely grateful. Got a call on Monday. Well, not a call. I was visiting someone who comes to our weekly classes. And at the end of the class, I know her husband has been ill, but she said that he's on his deathbed. So I asked if they had any plans for a burial. And she said that they were planning on a cremation.
Oh, wow.
So based on what we learned last course about Journey of the Soul, that's not so helpful for the soul, not so helpful for the body. We had a conversation, and she agreed to change her mind, but she was not willing to pay for it.
Right. Wow.
So I sent out a message to some of my friends, and it was absolutely incredible. We had to raise. She was willing to pay $2,000. We had to raise another $6,200. Within 2.5 hours, the complete amount was raised.
Wow.
So that was way above my head, and I'm extremely grateful to Hashem and to those very special people, over 90 people, 92 donors.
Wow, you have a lot of friends.
My friends have a lot of friends.
Yeah, you see that.
And I'm eternally grateful. So let's say a big l'chaim for the neshama of Eliezer ben Yaakov, and for all the special people who stepped in to help his soul get eternal peace and eternal rest. L'chaim to them.
L'chaim.
L'chaim also to Rabbi Lieberman and his wife, who have sponsored the sponsorships for today's course. I am going to take just a moment and call Leib Moshe. I know that sometimes he appreciates a phone call reminder, and then we'll jump right in. Meanwhile, you can look at exercise 5.1. That's on student page. That's on, so what student page is it on? Student page 194.
190.
Okay, perfect. I know sometimes you like a phone reminder, so I figured I'd pick up. We'll see you soon. Bye. Okay. He'll be logging on in just a moment. So I really don't think that we have enough time to go through this exercise and actually spend 10 minutes on it. It could be a great exercise. I know that some people sent it out to their course participants as a homework exercise. I never liked homework in school, so I figured you might not either. So let's just think for a moment, if based on everything that you know so far, think for a moment about how you envision Mashiach coming. What is the most interesting part of it to you? What is the most radical change? And how do you depict it? So just we'll spend about 30 seconds to a minute just thinking in our own minds, visualizing and trying to crystallize everything that we've learned until now. What would be your headline? What would be your lead? What would be your body, the body of your text? And are there any texts that you would pull on?
I'm leaning to you, Joe. You got to pass.
No, we don't have to say it. It could be just
Okay.
whatever it is to. So for Leib Moshe and for Auntie Nina, we are going through a quick exercise just in our minds. I don't want to take too long with this. That if you were a journalist and Mashiach came today and you were tasked to scramble and write a news article heralding the coming of Mashiach, what would be your headline? What would be your body? What would be your lead? What would be your hook? What would be the most fascinating thing that's going on? What's the greatest part of it? And what's the most intriguing part of it based on what we've learned the past 4 weeks? And the purpose of this exercise is to kind of crystallize our vision of Mashiach the way we understand it currently. So let's take a minute for that.
Bye, sweetheart. I'll see you later.
Okay, so is there anyone who would like to share a point or two? Joan, go ahead.
Okay, headline.
Take it, whatever you want.
World is coming to a peaceful resolution.
Nice.
I like it.
Very nice. Is there
Okay.
something else you'd like to share from the body or the lead?
Oh my.
Only if you'd like to, with no pressure.
Good night.
And this will be forever.
Okay. Good. Is there anyone else would like to share? Either their headline or their lead? Go for it, Auntie Nina.
All right, just one little bit. Nature unveiled.
Very nice. Very nice. Okay, you guys are doing very well. You've got the course down pat. So we're going to start. Today's class is going to start off a little bit about speed. On that vein, there were 3 students that were in the playground, little kids. And you know how the conversations go? First kid says, my dad's faster than all of you guys' dads. My father can shoot an arrow and he can get to the tree before the arrow. Second kid says, oh, you think that's fast? My dad's a hunter. He can shoot a deer and get to the deer before the bullet does. Third kid says, hey, you guys know nothing about speed. My dad finishes work at 4:30 and he's home at 3:45.
That's a good one.
So, to recap what we've learned about until now, we've learned a lot about the what, the why, the how, and the when. And today we're going to focus on a little bit more of the how and the who. So in lesson 1, we spoke about the physical what. What's the world going to look like physically? What's the world going to change like? Lessons 2, 3, and 4, we're speaking a lot about the spiritual what. What is the purpose of Mashiach spiritually? Which is to have a world which, quote unquote, screams godliness, a world which is aligned with its true purpose. We spoke about the reason why we have a Mashiach to begin with, which is because that's what Hashem wanted when he created the world. He wanted a place where we, through our own work, make the world a good place. And we spoke about how that happens through our good deeds, and when that happens once we've tipped the scales. Today we're going to be speaking about the Mashiach. This is going to answer Leib Moshe's question, how do we know if he's the real deal? When Mashiach comes, we look in the past, 2 very famous icons that you may be familiar with are Bar Kokhba, the revolt of Bar Kokhba in Roman times, you may be familiar with, as well as more famously, more recently, the failed Messiah Shabtai Tzvi. No? Okay. Well, we'll have some history courses a different time, but those are two very well-known messiahs. What's the difference between the two of them, and how do we know, or were we to know back then, whether they were or were not the real deal?
Don't forget that many people thought that Schneerson was the Mashiach also.
Right, we're going to get into that. We are going to discuss, you may have heard people referring to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, as Mashiach. What does that mean? What's the context for that? Is that a naive and erroneous belief? What's the context? Is it perhaps meritorious? And let's understand a little bit about where that comes from and what the purpose of that is. Great question, Leib Moshe. So, there's two students. It's the first day back of school in 8th grade. And Jordan turns to David and says, David, what do you think of the new year? And David says to Jordan, well, Jordan, there's a lot of pressure for you. After all, your father was valedictorian. Your mother was valedictorian. Your older sister was valedictorian. And he says, well, I guess it's the end of an era. So let's exercise 5.2, which is on page 196. We're going to go through 5 texts over here. We're going to look at 5 different texts, and we are going to be speaking about over here the process of Mashiach, the time of Mashiach, the era of Mashiach. Is Mashiach something that happens overnight? Snap of the fingers, and all of a sudden everything is perfect? We hear the trumpet blowing, the shofar blast on the Temple Mount, and then everything changes for good? Or is there something that's more gradual, like we learned last week? So I'm just going to turn the AC over here a little bit warmer, and we will get into text number 1. Okay. So we're going to go through text number 1 through text number 5. So, Mordechai, would you like to read for us text number 1?
Yes.
That will be on page 196.
Behold, I will send my angel, and he will clear a way before me, and suddenly the God whom you seek will come to his temple.
Okay, so is that a sudden or is that gradual?
That is,
That is sudden.
Yeah, I'd say sudden. All of a sudden that the angel
And
will
all
come.
of a sudden, the God who you seek will come to his temple. All of a sudden, we're going to... So let's look at text number 2. Joan, please.
When a mortal monarch plans to return to his home, it is typical protocol for his arrival to be announced in advance. An initial announcement may give notice that he will arrive in 10 days, followed perhaps by a second advisory 5 days in advance, and then 4 days until the final proclamation. The king is approaching the capital. The prophet Isaiah informed us that the Jewish redemption will not unfold in this manner, rather it will arrive in the blink of an eye. As he foretold, the first one designed, behold, here they are, and for Jerusalem I will give a herald. In other words, Jerusalem's residents will not notice that all the tribes of Israel are converging on their city before the initial announcement is made by the first individual to reach Jerusalem, who will call out, look, here they all are about to enter the city. It will be so sudden that the city's residents will not notice a thing before the reality materializes. The announcement and the event will come as one. Hence, the initial notice for Jerusalem, I will give a herald, will be, behold, here they are. Sudden.
Okay, so is that sudden or is that gradual?
that is very sudden.
It's both.
And it contradicts everything that we've learned up to this point, which involves a transformation of mankind and the earth to more godly things. And then,
Yes, sudden.
you know, we're
Moshe.
going-
Leib Moshe, I'm only just imagining what a different kind of teacher I would have been if you would have been in my 6th grade class. Brilliant. Brilliant. I was waiting until about 15 minutes from now to ask you guys to think about what problem there might be. So,
You
good
can't
question,
get nothing
Leib Moshe.
past them.
Sorry.
You can't get nothing past Leib Moshe. That's for sure.
Well, it's a bit of both, isn't it? Like Joan said.
Yeah. Okay. So let's pause for a moment. Leib Moshe, hold that thought. We're gonna make the question a little bit better. We're gonna make the question a little bit better. We're gonna build up a little bit, and then we'll get to that question. So, text number 3, Leib Moshe, would you like to read text number 3 for us? I think that you're gonna enjoy this text a little more.
Sure. Opening the gate of redemption. When God will raise up the people of Israel and redeem them from this exile, he will open a small, thin ray of light for them. Thereafter, he will open another, far wider aperture. Finally, God will throw open the supernal gates that open to all 4 corners of the universe.
Okay. So is that gradual or is that sudden?
Gradual.
Well, that's a little more gradual.
That's more gradual. A little bit of light, more light, more light, more light, more light until we get there. Very good. Mordechai, text number 4.
The Jewish people of that generation will say, is it possible that the world functions as usual and nevertheless the redemption will arrive this year? However, they do not realize that Mashiach's arrival will be sudden.
Okay. So what's that? That's sudden.
Now we're back to
And
sudden.
finally, Joan, please, text number 5.
I
Like
can't
the
pronounce
crack of
these-
dawn.
I can't pronounce these names. Rabbi Abba and Rabbi Shimon once walked through the Arbel Valley and watched the break of dawn, whereupon Rabbi told Rabbi, so will be the Jewish redemption. It will begin with small steps, as it is stated, although I will sit in the darkness, God will be a light to me. Then as it progresses, it will greatly swell and expand.
Beautiful. So what is that?
Gradual.
Gradual. So this is a very short build-up to one of the greatly debated topics regarding Mashiach's coming. So before we get into this lesson, I want to mention something which is very important that is going to be a precursor to today's entire lesson, which is that the prophets are full of different prophecies regarding Mashiach. Some which you may be familiar of are the wolf will lie with the lamb, the child will play with the snake, etc., so on and so forth. So how do we know which one of these things, what do they really mean? Many people say, well, they're just parables, while others say that it's to be taken literally. So how do we know what to believe when it comes to Mashiach? The answer is like this. Maimonides, the Rambam, was one of the greatest codifiers of Jewish law.
So essentially, there's agreement amongst the scholars, the Talmudic scholars.
We're going to get there. We're going to get there. So whenever there's an argument, we follow what is written in Jewish law. Now, the Rambam was argued upon about many concepts. That's why we have some of the differences between the Sephardim and the Ashkenazim. However, when it comes to a concept which is not disputed, the Rambam's word is taken as final from a Jewish law standpoint. The Rambam is the only book of Jewish law who brings down the laws of Mashiach, who codifies the laws of Mashiach. The last 2 chapters of the Rambam speak about Mashiach. And because he is uncontested, his word remains the final word on the subject of Mashiach as it pertains to Jewish law. Why is that so important? It's so important because unlike the Medrash, unlike the prophets, some of the prophets, unlike the Gemara, which can be explained homiletically, can be explained allegorically, can be explained to be a parable or a something without plain physical meaning. When it comes to Jewish law is to be interpreted solely to the letter of the law with no other hidden explanations. So whatever the Rambam writes is to be taken literally. When the Rambam writes, whatever the Rambam writes about Mashiach is to be taken literally at face value. Now, the Rambam writes about all of those, many of those prophecies, that some of them seem to contradict each other. Some of them, we don't know what they mean. And his basic principle is, we'll find out when we find out. The belief in Mashiach is very important. Certain core principles, especially ones that we're going to discuss today, are fundamental to the Jewish belief, because without them, we won't know whether the Mashiach has come or not come. Therefore, it's very important to understand them very clearly. However, when it comes to the food growing on the trees and the wolf laying with the lamb, those things don't add to our belief or our fear of God or love for God. Therefore, the Rambam says, don't spend too much time on it, and we'll figure it out when it happens. That's the Rambam's basic principle. So, to summarize what we just said, is that the Rambam is the authority, the halachic authority, the Jewish law, the bottom line Jewish law, when it comes to Mashiach. And therefore, a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about tonight are going to be coming from the Rambam's code of Jewish law. Now, let's look at text number 6 to answer this seeming discrepancy, which is, on the one hand, it seems to be saying that we have very good sources that Mashiach is going to be coming in a sudden manner without any warning in advance. Yet on the other hand, we're saying that it's a gradual process, and we're going to be slowly and slowly more and more enlightened until the time comes when everything will be perfect. So let's look from Isaiah and the explanation in the Gemara. Leib Moshe, would you like to read text number 6a and 6b?
Okay. Hastening its time. The smallest will become 1,000, and the least a mighty nation. I am God. I will factor. The same verse that states in its time also states, I will hasten it. Is there a set time for the redemption or not? The Talmud resolves the seeming contradiction. If they merit, I will hasten it. If they do not merit, it will occur only when its time arrives.
Okay, so those are the two options. Option number 1, we do such a good job and we figure everything out, and then it's a gradual progression. As we figure it out, it gets better and better, closer and closer until we get there. The other option is that it comes in its set time. If we are not meritorious and we didn't fully get the point, so then Hashem has a set time, a predetermined time, where he says, at that point in time, whether they're perfect or not, Mashiach is going to come. So if we are meritorious, then it's going to be slowly but surely. If we are not meritorious, then it's going to be suddenly at the appointed time.
Does that kind of imply, Rabbi, that if it's so sudden that we really didn't pass the test, so to speak, of developing it slowly?
That's a good question. That's a very good question.
As opposed to if we do everything right, then it will come gradually as it's meant to be.
Right. So that's a good question, Leib Moshe, and we're hopefully going to answer that right now. Yes, Auntie Nina.
It was me, but that's okay.
I mean, sorry, Mordechai.
That's okay.
I apologize.
Also me.
Mordechai, what's your question? And then I wanted to ask a question.
Oh, I did already. Nina.
Oh, okay. I raised my hand in real time, not on the whatever. Okay, so just very quickly, can it be both that for some people, it'll happen gradually because they're studying all the time about Mashiach and the others. Like I had a coffee with two friends, two Jewish beautiful women, and I had no clue, and I didn't really want to talk about it. Maybe for people like that, it will come suddenly.
So you're saying that there'll be different classes of people who will receive the Mashiach at different times? That doesn't sound right.
No, that is not what I am saying. I am saying
I'm sorry if
Mashiach
I
will happen at
misunderstood
this.
you.
Okay, may I put it another way? Mashiach will happen at the same time for everyone. However, some people will be prepared, so it'll seem like gradual. Other people will not be prepared, and it will feel like, wow, sudden.
That's good.
Okay, that's a great answer.
So it's
That's
a
a
matter
great
of
answer.
perspective.
So it depends on who you are. For some people who are looking out for the signs of the ingathering of the redemption, and they're with their spiritual binoculars looking out into the distance, seeing the 10 tribes converging on Jerusalem. Right back to that text number 3, I think it was. So for people, or text number 2. So for those who are aware, like all of us here, who are learning about Mashiach and understanding the signs that are showing that Mashiach is closer, when Mashiach comes, we'll say, okay, we've been waiting for you and we're ready for you to come. For those people who were not so informed, they'll be shocked. Okay, that sounds like a great answer. What I want,
Rabbi, if I may. So for something that we've learned is the culmination of all of Judaism, everything that we were created for as Jews, and our mission on this earth from God was to make the world ready for Mashiach, and we still end up with this kind of a nebulous answer.
Nebulous.
What no?
so Leib Moshe, I think that you're asking the question that I wanted everybody to be asking. And let's build a build up so that we'll have everyone answering it. Last week, we learned in no uncertain terms, very clearly we learned that Mashiach has to come as a result of our work. And if it doesn't come as a result of our work, it's not Mashiach, right? By the time of the giving of the Torah, that wasn't considered Mashiach because it was God appearing on the mountain. It wasn't us based on our own work. Is that an issue with what we're saying now?
Yes.
And
Yes. It is. Clearly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
so, Leib Moshe, I think that might have been what you were asking in the beginning. And that's a brilliant question that I'm glad you all asked. How could there be a time that Mashiach, that Hashem says, if by this date the Jews have not done a good enough job, I'm going to bring Mashiach? Well, then that's not Mashiach. If God decides that they've done enough, that at this and this time, whether they did it or whether they deserve it or not, I'm bringing Mashiach. That doesn't fit with what we learned last week. It would be, God forbid, to say, chas v'shalom, to say like this, but when Hashem created the world and he created the Jewish people, he, God forbid, to say such words or even to suggest that he miscalculated our abilities and gave us a job that was too hard for us, and so he's gonna bring the end goal even though we didn't do our work, and so he's gonna settle for less because we're not good enough. Is that what kind of a God we have?
I would hope not.
I would sure hope not.
Right.
Yeah, but he also says he's always going to give us leaders in every generation who will help us.
Okay. So that leads us towards the answer. This is an answer that I have run by a few greater rabbis than myself, and they have agreed and concurred that this is the correct answer. If we are meritorious and we get the message on our own, we'll get the message on our own. If we are not meritorious, God is going to give us helpful hints along the way that will help us get back on track.
So God's going to give us Mashiach for dummies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sounds like a good book.
And the truth of the matter is that the Lubavitcher Rebbe was one big Mashiach for dummies. If we look at how many Jews were speaking about Mashiach, how many Jews knew about Mashiach until the Lubavitcher Rebbe entered the scene, it wasn't on the forefront of people's minds. But the Rebbe spoke, and like we said the other week, we finished lesson 3, I think, that the Rebbe spoke about Mashiach again and again and again. Every single week, every single speech that the Rebbe said finished with a blessing that Mashiach should come now. And it's only since his influence that when we finish our tefillin, what do we say, Leib Moshe?
We want Mashiach now.
We want Mashiach now, exactly. So it's not Hashem doing it on his own. It's Hashem giving us hints to kind of remind us what we're doing and where we're doing it, what we're here for and how to do it. This course itself is a message from God reminding us of what we're here for, reminding us that it's time for us to do those final touches to bring Mashiach. So maybe we weren't meritorious enough until now, but Hashem sent us this course so that we can become meritorious.
So all Chabad outreach and then this course is all part of the Mashiach for Dummies course. See,
Yep.
Now I know why I'm here.
Me too.
Yes, right. Did I?
Exactly. So, there are issues with believing only one or the other of just Be'ita and just Achishena. If we believe only that Mashiach is going to become suddenly, then as the gradual progression that we spoke about in lesson 1 and that we spoke about in lesson 2, people who believe that Mashiach is supposed to come suddenly will not believe that this has anything to do with Mashiach, and will not either believe in their power to do anything to bring Mashiach, because when the time comes, Mashiach is going to be here. Those who believe only in the gradual progression, if there's an aspect of Mashiach that comes suddenly, they're not going to believe that it's the real Mashiach. So the truth is that it's really most of the sages agree that it's some sort of a mixture of the two.
But the people for whom it comes slowly, they'll work towards making the world ready for Mashiach. They will experience the fullness of Mashiach. They will experience the changeover in the world. They will really feel it because they've been working hard towards that for many years.
Exactly. The more that we have to do with the process, the better we'll feel with the outcome. That's exactly correct. And so just to finish this thought before, and then we'll get to Antonina. So
No, nothing.
Oh, okay. So the what it seems to be is that from a physical standpoint, the world is changing gradually. And then there comes a time that our spiritual work, for example, right now, our spiritual work is not being felt so much. The world is getting closer in terms of how people are viewing God and religion, and people are coming back to their roots and learning more. But overall in the world, we don't feel so spiritually close like they did in the times of the temple. What it seems is that in certain aspects, the world is getting slowly and slowly closer to Mashiach. Yet at the same time, it's going to take one mitzvah to tip the scales. And at that point is when all these beautiful prophecies are going to come true. The Mashiach is going to be revealed in flesh and blood. We're going to hear the trumpets blowing. The temple will be rebuilt in the Beis HaMikdash, and all of a sudden there will be a flood of spiritual awareness. So that's how this balanced approach works. So
It was just the word you used once before about people being woke or not woke.
Exactly. Yes. So to summarize what we've said so far in terms of the how will it happen, it's going to be a little bit of both, a little bit sudden and a little bit gradual. And this is one of the big debates that if you learn more, you can spend many weeks just studying this subject. Will it be sudden or will it be gradual? This is Mashiach for Dummies course, is that the answer is that parts of it are gradual and parts of it are sudden. And like I said before from the Rambam, that we'll find out when we find out. That will be the bottom line.
Very Jewish.
Message number 2. Go ahead.
That would some people find out earlier than others.
That doesn't
So,
make sense.
it's a good question. And the answer is that everybody's going to find out at the same time. In fact, today we can understand that even easier than they could in previous generations. In previous generations, there was a great wonderment. How could everyone find out about Mashiach? And how will everyone know that he's arrived? Today, with the radio, or even past that, with TV, with social media, with Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and TikTok, even we don't even need the newspapers anymore. But there is a video clip that you can see that one day there was a journalist who walked past the Rebbe by Sunday Dollars. And the Rebbe told him, "You're a journalist, so make sure that you have ready what to write when Mashiach comes, what to publish in the newspapers and how to publish it. Have that ready, study the concept so that when he comes, you'll have articles ready to print." The next thing before we get into actual Mashiach is Elijah the prophet. Elijah the prophet is very well associated with the coming of Mashiach. I see Lev Moshe nodding his head. So we're going to learn a little bit about Elijah the prophet. It would be remiss to speak about the coming of Mashiach without mentioning Elijah. What is his purpose? Where does he fit in? What's he doing here? And why him? So the questions we're going to ask are 2 questions. Question number 1 is, why do we need Elijah? Why do we need someone to come to herald? Well, let's first look at text number 7. Mordechai, would you like to read text number 7 from Malachi?
Sure. I will send Elijah the prophet to you before the arrival of the day of God.
Thank you. So Elijah is one of the most well-known and one of the most beloved of the prophets. And the questions we're asking are twofold. Number 1, why can't Mashiach just come? Why do we need Elijah the prophet to come to herald the coming of Mashiach? The second question is, why him? Why can't it be anyone else? So here are the answers. To answer question number 1, why is Mashiach coming? Sorry, why is Elijah coming? Number 1, there are 3 options for this. Number 1 is so that we can do some last teshuvah. We can do some last minute returning to God and repenting for our sins that we have done now that we know that here's the real deal. We got one last chance to fix up anything that we might have done wrong. A second answer is to emotionally prepare us for the coming of Mashiach, that it shouldn't be a sudden shock, but that we should be prepared and awaiting and anticipating that he's right here, and to be ready and excitedly waiting, that he shouldn't catch us in the middle of a workday, but we should have time to get dressed and dress up for the occasion. The third option is that a king needs a herald. A king needs a herald. If a physical king has trumpeters going before him, Mashiach, which is the culmination of 5,781 years of work, definitely deserves a trumpeter. So those are the 3 reasons. Let's look at figure 5.1. What is Elijah going to do? This is on page 204 in your student books. Number 1, what he's going to do is announce Mashiach's imminent arrival. There are a few things that he's going to do. And after looking at figure 5.1 and seeing what are the things that are going to be done, we're going to understand why it has to be only him. So the first thing is to announce Mashiach's imminent arrival, to let us know that Mashiach is coming today, tomorrow. Number 2 is to inspire Israel to better their ways and prepare their hearts for the redemption, as we spoke before. Number 3 is to restore prophecy to the Jewish people. Excuse me. The Jewish people have been without the traditional sense of prophecy for many, many hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. Elijah is going to teach the principles of prophecy and to inspire us, to allow us to attain a level where we may be privy to prophecy. The Rambam writes that there were schools of students who were learning prophecy. There were students who were ready, and they had to be in a very exalted state of mind, ready that if God should choose to reveal himself to them, that they will be ready and in the proper state of mind. The very holy spiritual people, and Elijah is going to teach us how to attain that. Number 4 is to answer unresolved halachic queries. This will take a little bit more explanation. The Gemara, the Talmud, for all those of us who are familiar with the Talmud, is full of questions and answers, disputes and disagreements. Usually we come to an answer. Usually we come to an agreement where either there will be a majority which rules, or there will be a more logical answer which prevails. But sometimes we just don't know. It's a great question. Someone said something and it was ambiguous and we're not sure what he meant. Did he mean A, B, or C? And sometimes the Gemara just answers Teku, which means in Aramaic, let it stand. We don't know what the answer is. And that is said to be an acronym for Tishbi Yataretz Kushis Va'abayis. Elijah will come and answer the questions that we don't know the answers to. There is a halachic formula. What are you supposed to do if you come to a situation which has no formally resolved halachic explanation? But we don't know what the real answer is. When Elijah comes, Elijah is going to answer all of those questions. Here, it had to be Elijah specifically. And let's speak a little bit about Elijah and understand why it had to be him. Elijah is one of 4 people in history who ascended to heaven alive with their bodies. What that exactly means, I can't explain to you. But the prophecy is very clear in the story is very clear in the book of the prophets, in Samuel, I think, or Kings, where Elisha, the student of Elijah, was walking with a friend and they were talking and they were walking behind their teacher. And then all of a sudden, a fiery chariot descended from heaven. Elijah ascended into the chariot and in a whirlwind of fire ascended to heaven together with the chariot and disappeared, and he was no longer.
That's the ancient alien astronaut theory.
He was abducted by a godly fire. And that's really important for the next 2 things. So, if we were looking to resolve Torah questions, who do you think would be the most appropriate person for that? If we have the entire history to choose from, right? Mashiach is coming, resurrection of the dead. We have the entire Jewish population to choose from. Who would you choose to ask your questions about Torah?
Moses.
Leib Moshe says Moses. It's your name. Who else agrees with him?
Rabbi
Okay.
Akiva.
Okay, Antonina says Rabbi Akiva. I mean, I would think that if Moses was the one who was explained the entire Torah straight from God, there's an unbroken chain there with only one step. He received it first person from God. One of the people that Moses taught the Torah to was Elijah's teacher. But if we can go straight to Moses, why would we go to a chain of command?
Good question.
The answer is that the Torah was given to earthly beings, earthly creatures. We know that there was a dispute that the angels did not want the Jewish people to receive the Torah. The angels said, keep the Torah in heaven. And God said, no, the Torah is here to be given to the Jewish people, down on earth. Moses, once he ascended to heaven, and he's been there for many thousands of years, he forgot what the world is like. And the truth is, even when he was on this earth, to a certain degree, he was removed. He spent 40 days on the mountain without eating or drinking. But he still was an earthly creature. However, once he escaped his body, he forgot everything that pertains to this world. So even though he may be able to give us a beautiful explanation, it would not be the Torah that we need. It would be a godly, heavenly Torah. Elijah the prophet, who was 2 steps later, his teacher was taught directly from Moses. His teacher was Achia Hashiloni, one of the well-written about historical Jewish figures. So Elijah was very close to Moses, so chances are that he got a very good understanding of the Torah. He was only, 1 step in between him and Moses. And he, as a human being who went up to heaven with his body, still retained his sensitivity for the human beings and the human rationale. And the way we are, like, remember we spoke in the previous course, Journey of the Soul, that the soul gets affected and our intellect gets affected by our bodies and gets changed to a certain degree by our bodies. Therefore, Elijah and no one else will be able to answer our questions in a way that relates to the human body. No other person who existed in history would be able to give us answers, would be able to know the answers and give them to us from a rational, logical human perspective. Was that a little bit too in the clouds, or that was a good explanation?
Yeah, that, and he was a heck of a chauffeur player.
Very good. And number 5 is to restore the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin is the Jewish court of law, which is made up of 71 judges. I don't know what you call that, a uniseptennial tribunal. No, tribunal is 3. A uniseptibunal, whatever the word would be. 71 judges was the high court, and they had to be ordained in a direct line from Moses. So Moses ordained the first 70 rabbis, and them together with him became the first high court of Jewish law, the Supreme Court. They ordained students who became the Supreme Court after them, who ordained students who became the Supreme Court after them. And there was a chain of ordination, teacher to student. Now, there are a few interesting, let's get into this for just a moment. In order to be a Sanhedrin, in order to be an ordained court of law, they had to be ordained in the country of Israel. And there had to be a direct connection between them and the land of Israel. At a certain point in time, all the rabbis that had been ordained were forced out of Israel. And they were therefore in the diaspora and not able to ordain any more students. So at that point, the chain of ordination was broken. And since then, we do not have the Jewish Supreme Court. Why is that important? In order to have Mashiach, we have to have a Supreme Court. Elijah, who was one of those that were ordained and went up to heaven in his body, he never died. When he comes back, he will be able to ordain another 70 people and create a new Jewish Supreme Court. So it's this unique factor, the fact that he went up to heaven in his body, is why he is going to be the one to herald Mashiach's coming, why he is going to be the one to establish the Sanhedrin. He is going to be the one to answer all of our unresolved questions. And perhaps that's the reason why God took him up to heaven in his body and did not detach his body from his soul, in order to keep him so that when the time comes, we'll be able to continue our traditions. So, we've explained why we have to have a herald, why there has to be somebody to come before Mashiach, and we've explained why it has to be Elijah the prophet. At any rate, he is definitely synonymous with the redemption. And if we look actually, and this is all over Jewish texts and Jewish history, if you look at figure 5.2, Auntie Nina, I don't think that we were able to ship you a book all the way to Australia. So over here, if you see this picture, if you look at the bottom half, I'm going to read the blurb a second over here. This is from, this was printed, or I don't know if it was printed or hand written. It's a Passover Haggadah made in Mantua in 1560. That's many, many years ago. And this is part of the Braginsky collection. And if you see on the bottom, you see King Mashiach riding on his donkey, followed by Elijah the prophet blowing a shofar. So we see very clearly, and almost every illustrated Passover Haggadah has pictures of Elijah with it in terms of connection to the redemption. So at any rate, it's important to mention him if we are talking about the redemption. And now, to summarize that, before we get into Mashiach, just a quick summary, and then we'll get to Lev Moshe's question. Elijah has a part in the redemption, and we have defined his role, which is that he is going to herald the redemption. He's going to inspire Israel to better their ways. He's going to restore prophecy, answer unresolved halachic queries, and restore the Sanhedrin. Yes, Lev Moshe.
Since it talks about blowing the shofar and it's depicted on a Haggadah, is there a connection between the time that the Mashiach will come and Pesach?
That's a great question. The short answer is yes. And the long answer is that it's beyond the scope of our time. If we have time at the end, please, let's get back to that.
Okay, thank you.
You are welcome. At this point, we are ready. There was a Jewish canoe team, and they were practicing. The Israeli canoe team was practicing for many, many, many months to compete in the International Canoeing Championship. The time came, and they lost heavily. They lost. They came far last. They got to the finish line many, 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 many hours after everyone else had gone home for lunch. Somebody came to the Israeli canoe team, the Jewish canoe team, and they asked, if you were preparing for so much longer than everyone else, why did you fail so miserably? And they answered, you see, there's a difference between our canoe team and everyone else's canoe teams. All the other canoe teams have 1 leader and 9 rowers. We have 9 leaders and 1 rower. So now we are ready to speak about the Jewish leader, the Jewish Mashiach. How do we know who the Jewish Mashiach is? So we're going to start with text number 8. Lev Moshe, text number 8.
Thank you. I wish Carmen was here. Flesh and blood. King Mashiach will certainly be a righteous human, born of a man and a woman. In other words, he's not a god.
Exactly. So we're going to be sensitive over here. And at the same time, we're going to be very clear, which is that the basic thing, this is from Rabbi Chaim Vital. He puts it very clearly that Mashiach will be a human being born from a father and a mother. Therefore, those who are trying to convince Jewish people, unfortunately, they are trying to convince Jewish people that there is a Mashiach who came, who was born not to a father and mother, but to a mother and a God. And they are trying to convince us that he is the Jewish Mashiach. Here we see very clearly that that is not the case. Mashiach must be born to a human father and a human mother. That's number 1. Number 2, text number 9. Let's read. Yeah, Joan, would you like to read text number 9?
Behold, my
Man.
servant will succeed. He will be exalted and elevated, and he will reach tremendous heights. This is a reference to the King Mashiach, who will be exalted over Abraham, elevated higher than Moses, and he will reach tremendous heights greater than the angels.
Okay, thank you very much. So following along these lines, the Rambam describes
I'm
Moses.
sorry,
So let's look
I
at
have to
the
interrupt one more
Rambam.
time. I'm sorry, I have to interrupt one more time. What I read in text 8 about the flesh and blood, where is that? Where does it say that?
So
I mean,
this
I
is
know it says- I know it says it in the text. But where is that written?
so the source that's here is Rabbi Chaim Vital, and the book is called Arba Meot Shekel Kesef, page 241.
So it's
Um,
not a part of halachic law or the Talmud. It's the opinion of a rabbi.
It is not the. That's a great question. That's a very good question. The answer is that is not the opinion of a rabbi. This is the source that they're bringing. It is brought down in other places as well, and this is a unanimous belief. And at a later date, we can get into certain things that are so simple and understood to be some things are not written because they're so obvious. So it takes sometimes one person to state the obvious. If you'd like further sources
Self-evident.
on the matter, we can definitely try and get that for you.
Please.
So Leib Moshe, would you like to read text number 10?
Okay. Greater than the great. The King Mashiach who will arise from David's descendants will be wiser than Solomon and a great prophet, close to the level of Moses. He will therefore teach the entire nation and instruct them in the path of God, and all the nations will come to hear his words.
Thank you. And Mordechai, would you like to read text number 11 on page 209?
Yes, Mashiach's uniqueness will be his humility, despite reaching the pinnacle of greatness, due to which he will teach Torah to the patriarchs and to Moses. He will nevertheless achieve the ultimate in humility and self-nullification, due to which he will also teach the simplest folk.
Could you imagine a teacher who will be teaching Moses, Abraham, and still have time for us?
So we are the simplest folk.
I think we are. So we could go on and on and on and on discussing all the different sources about what Mashiach is going to do and how he's going to look. But is there one essential thing that we can get to that really codifies this, from which everything else stems? Is there one essential point that we can point to from which everything else stems? The answer is yes. For this, I found this really interesting. I spent a lot of time, I'm just looking for interest of time. I think that this is an incredibly interesting journey. I am just wondering if it is more important than the rest. How about let's do this? Let's skip it for now. And then we'll come back to it at the end of the class. We'll see how much time we have. It's fascinating. And it will really bring to light and crystallize everything that we've learned until now in a beautiful way. That is a picture of the Rebbe. Yes, Auntie Nina?
Yes, it's 11 o'clock. So it's a moment for Malchus all over the world.
Oh, yes. It's 11 o'clock in Australia. A time
Yes.
for Malchus, kingship.
Yes.
So
Okay.
let's skip to text 13 for a moment, and we'll come back to visit text number 12 and figure 5.3. So an interesting thing to ask is, well, what is going to happen? And we're going to understand text number 13 better after we visit text number 12. But until then, There is something that is going to happen to Mashiach, which is going to change him and change the world. And the question is, will he be born with that, or will he just be another great rabbi until he becomes Mashiach? Text number 13. Joan, would you like to read this for us?
Sure. Moses, the first redeemer, reached the age of 80 years with no knowledge or intuition about his eventual role as the redeemer of Israel. So will it be, God willing, with the future redeemer. When the time comes, God will appear to him, and the spirit of Mashiach, that until that moment was hidden on high, will descend upon him, similar to the experience of Moses at the burning bush.
Exactly. So Moses, until he became Moses, he was just another rabbi. He was spiritual, he was holy. And then God gave him a certain mission and added to him a certain level of spirituality, which enabled him to take the Jews out of Egypt. Same thing is going to happen. There will be a Jewish leader, or possibly not a leader, but possibly a leader, but a Jewish man who will be very holy. At some point in time, at some point in his life, God will descend upon him, and God will add to him a certain aspect which will bring enlightenment and beauty to the entire world and usher in the era of Mashiach. So again, something that we've spoken about a few times is the era of Mashiach, which is the idea, the concept, and the era of Mashiach. And there's the person of Mashiach. The person of Mashiach ushers in the era of Mashiach. So how will we know who this person is? There are so many people, and if you go to the psych ward, you'll see many, many of them who claim to be Mashiach.
Well, one thing that happened when Moshe was exposed to the burning bushes, it said that his face glowed with holiness after the experience. So will this individual have that, or is that just torturing the comparison too much?
That's a great question. I don't know. I haven't yet read anything on the subject, but it's a good question. So when there's someone who comes and tells us that he is Mashiach, well, how do we know if he is the Mashiach or not? How will we know? Is there like a spiritual MRI that we can do to find out if he got this revelation from God or not? None that I know of. So let's look at Maimonides. Let's look at the Rambam. The Rambam says that there are really, what we're going to look at now in texts 14, 15, and 16, that there are three categories. There's a potential Mashiach, a presumed Mashiach, and a confirmed Mashiach. And each of those has very specific parameters. So let's start with text number 14 from the Rambam. Leib Moshe, would you like to read for us text number 14, please? You there, Leib Moshe?
It's going to get a drink.
Maybe he didn't hear you.
Yeah, Mordechai, would you like to read text number 14?
Sure. When a king from the house of David will arise, who, like his ancestor David, diligently studies the Torah and observe its mitzvot as prescribed by the written law and the oral law, influences all of Israel to walk in the way of the Torah, rectifies the breaches in its observance, and wages God's battles, this person is presumed to be Mashiach.
Okay, so we're going to pause over here and say that there are certain, we're going to look at this again in the figure, but there are certain things that if somebody does those, then they are considered, that we presume to them to be Mashiach. Then, continue, Leib Moshe.
My screen froze.
Sorry, not Leib Moshe. Continue, Mordechai, please. I'm sorry.
If he succeeds in the above and he builds the temple in its place and gathers the dispersed of Israel, he is certainly the Mashiach.
Okay, so if he does all of those, and then he builds the temple and gathered the dispersed of Israel, so then we know he is the Mashiach. And at that point is when the era of Mashiach begins. when the
Are
temple
those
is
like the
in place
conditions?
and the
Those are like the
dispersed of Israel are gathered.
Sorry, those are like the prerequisites or the conditions? He has
Yeah.
to meet, okay.
So let's look at figure 5.4. The presumed Mashiach must be a descendant of King David. We don't really know necessarily today. We can't always prove whether they are or they aren't. So if somebody has a claim and can show us a family tree going back to King David, we will believe that. They have to be supremely pious and well-versed in the Torah. That's pretty clear. They have to influence the Jewish nation to follow the ways of the Torah. And have to wage God's battle.
Oh,
Now, there's a question as to whether that means spiritual battles or physical battles. Yes, Antonina?
yeah, just going back has to influence everyone, but it's missed out that he has to keep it himself.
Yes. So I think that that's included in being supremely pious and well-versed in the Torah. I don't think we would call someone supremely pious if they were not observing the Torah.
Okay, maybe it's an old-fashioned wording, but who observes. Anyway, okay.
So
Thank you.
actually, if we looked at back to the text, he says, if he is diligent in the Torah and observing its mitzvot.
Yes.
That
Yes.
was the words of the text.
Yes. Yes. That's
So I
what
guess
I
they were
was
trying to
looking
just
for.
like crystallize that into as short as possible. Thank you for bringing that up. So in terms of waging the battles, there is question whether this means information wars to where people are misguided and where people are waging intellectual wars against God and Judaism, and to fight that with spreading the knowledge of God and influencing people the correct ways, or whether that means physical battles. But the given understanding is either of those are good enough.
It's
So
also interesting that despite all the work that we should be doing to prepare the earth for the arrival of the Mashiach, he's got a lot of heavy lifting to do once he gets here.
yeah,
That's an understatement.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
we are the foot soldiers. We are the foot soldiers. Okay, we're doing the work too.
yes. So we are all. If he has helped us influence others, and he has waged a war of influence by teaching us to teach others, then he is waging the war, and we are all going along with that. Joan?
Right. I think it would be kind of disappointing if it were physical battles.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So these qualities and these actions are bringing. If we see someone like that, we can presume that they are Mashiach. So this doesn't take one day. It doesn't take a minute. So long as he is meeting success, and for the entire time that he is meeting success, we are to throw our entire weight behind him with belief that he is going to be the Mashiach.
And if I may add, when it comes to the question of physical or spiritual battles, as I'm sorry, I forget your name, the lady who said that
Joan.
I'm sorry,
Joan.
Joan.
Yes.
Yes.
What Joan had said about it would be disappointing if it was physical. I mean, if it was physical, then all we'd have is Mashiach Yoda, and he'd be jumping around with a lightsaber. I don't think that's the Mashiach that we're waiting for.
Right.
And at this
Well-
point, there are no wars. There are no physical wars. Well, not many physical wars against God. I was about to say there are no physical wars against God, but if we look at what's going on in Israel, we might say that there are physical wars against God.
Yes.
Against God's people.
Yeah. So the next stage is when Mashiach proves that he's here to stay and that this is the real thing and that we can already relax. And that is when he ingathers the Jewish people and builds the Holy Temple. So if he can see the campaign through from the beginning till the end, and the end being the ingathering of the Jewish people all to Eretz Yisrael, to the land of Israel, the Holy Land and building the temple, at that point we know that it's all done. So let's move forward. The Mashiach in every generation. So let's look at text number 15 and 16. There was a man who was plowing his field. This is a tale that's spoken in the Gemara. There is debate whether this is an analogy or whether this is a true story that actually happened. At any rate, a man was plowing his field when his ox suddenly loud.
I'm sorry, I just was saying you mean allegory, not analogy.
Thank you. An Arab passerby inquired, "What is your nationality?" "I am a Jew," the plowman replied. "Untie your ox," the Arab advised, "and unharness your plow." That was considered a sign of mourning in those days. Why? Because the Jewish Holy Temple has just been destroyed. "What is your source for this information?" the Jew demanded. "I deciphered that from your ox's loud," replied the Arab. As they were talking, the ox suddenly lowed once more. "Harness your ox and retie the plow," the Arab exclaimed. "The Jewish Redeemer has just been born." So, if we were to take that on face value, we would see that the Mashiach would be about 1,800 years old, or 2,100 years old. So, how would we answer that? We don't see anyone who's that old. So the explanation would be that every single generation, there is someone who is worthy of being Mashiach, somebody who is alive with the qualities of being Mashiach. And if the people at the time do a good enough job, then he will be, revealed as the Mashiach. And if we look at Rabbi Ovadia Bartanura, the commentary to Ruth, in text number 16, he says, in every generation, a descendant of Judah is born who is a befitting candidate to be the Jewish Mashiach. So now we have here three different stages. We have someone in every single generation who is the potential Mashiach. He has the potential to be Mashiach. If the people are meritorious to a certain degree, he starts doing things that make him the presumed Mashiach. He will wage God's battle. He will influence the Jewish people to keep the Torah and mitzvahs properly. If that goes well and the people are following along and everything is as it should be and we do enough mitzvahs, then he will ingather the Jewish people from exile and build the third temple. Let's look in history and we will see that there were many teachers and students who looked to their teachers as being the Mashiach. Text number 17, the Talmud in Sanhedrin 98b says that these presumed Mashiach, this idea of a presumed Mashiach is not only in theory, but also in practice. What is Mashiach's name? So the scholars of Rabbi Shiloh's academy said his name is Shiloh. And let's skip to the next paragraph. The scholars of Rabbi Yanai's academy said his name is Yinon. Next paragraph, Rabbi Chanina's academy, they said his name is Chanina. Next paragraph, some say that his name is Menachem ben Chizkiah. As it says, the comfort of the Menachem should relieve my soul is far from me. Rabbi Nachman said, if the Messiah is among the living, he is a person who already occupies a government position such as me. As it is stated, their prince shall be of themselves, which means he's already a prince, already a leader, and their governor shall proceed from their midst. Rav, who was a student of Rabbi Yehuda the prince, said, if the Mashiach is from those who are currently living, then he is Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and if he is from the dead, then he is Daniel the Beloved. So an interesting thing that we see from here, and I think that this may be one of the earliest sources, that it is possible to have a Mashiach who will arise from the dead. However, what we see most importantly is that every group of students looked to their rabbi as the potential Mashiach in their generation. Now, what happens when there's a potential Mashiach who starts doing the things that a presumed Mashiach does? Do we have any kind of obligations? Let's look at text number 18. Text number 18 is more of the same, identifying the Mashiach of their own generations in more generations. But I want to look to text number 19, and we'll get back to that soon, more about the story of Bar Kokhba. But the Rambam in Mishnah Torah, in the book of Law, brings down a very peculiar piece of history which seemingly has nothing to do with Mashiach's coming. Rabbi Akiva, this is page 222. Rabbi Akiva was a phenomenal sage among the great sages of the Mishnaic era. He personally served as King Bar Koziba's arm bearer. Bar Koziba was the name of Bar Kokhba, and would proclaim that Bar Koziba was the king Messiah. Along with all the sages of his generation, he considered Bar Koziba to be the king Mashiach until Bar Koziba was killed because of sins. So we're going to get into that text more soon. But the question is, why does the Rambam bring that down? And the answer that many of the commentaries explain, is that when there is someone who is a potential Mashiach, and he starts doing things that the presumed Mashiach does, we are commanded to throw our weight behind him, to listen to his every word, to help him with his battles, to help him wage his wars, and to be there to serve him in his every need. That brings us back to Leib Moshe's question. There are those people who believed, and there are those people who still believe, that the Rebbe, that the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, is the Mashiach. What does that mean? I think now we have a little bit more context for that. We know that there's a concept of the potential Mashiach, somebody who has leadership qualities in every generation who could become Mashiach. The Lubavitcher Rebbe definitely fits all of those. He's a great leader. Every student says about their leader that he is the Mashiach. But if we look back to the figure 5.4, we know that the Rebbe is a descendant of King David. We know that if we look back in recent history, I don't think there was anyone more pious or well-versed in Torah than the Lubavitcher Rebbe. If we look back in the entire Jewish history, save Moses, was there anyone who influenced the Jewish nation to follow the ways of the Torah more than the Lubavitcher Rebbe did? I don't think so. There was one or two leaders in Jewish history who went out and made campaigns to educate the masses, but that was short-lived and in specific areas. The Lubavitcher Rebbe waged a war, waged God's battle against assimilation across the entire globe by sending out emissaries to teach Jews from all the furthest corners of the world. I mean, we have my aunt in Tasmania, which is probably as far as you can get, teaching Jewish people about Torah only because of the Lubavitcher Rebbe's inspiration. So if we're talking about waging the battles of teaching people about God and influencing the Jewish nation following the ways of the Torah, which is the things that are the presumed Mashiach, the Lubavitcher Rebbe checks all the boxes.
At all the boxes.
Of the presumed Mashiach. Has Mashiach come yet? No. And anybody who will tell you that the Lubavitcher Rebbe is the confirmed Mashiach and that the era of Mashiach has arrived is not speaking and not following Judaism. But to say that the Lubavitcher Rebbe as a personality embodied the concept of Mashiach and the presumed Mashiach and paved the way to Mashiach, that is something that clearly fits with all the texts.
But what you're saying is, if we go by what you're saying, that we should have allegiance and follow and put our faith in someone who shows the signs of the Mashiach, won't we be following a lot of false Mashiachs?
So that's a good question, and we're going to get there soon. It's an excellent question. That's going to be the next and pretty much final part of our class. If we have to follow anyone who fits these rules, wouldn't we be following a lot of false Mashiachs? And that's a great question. That's a great question. I want to ask if you feel that there's a better understanding contextually and a better clarity about why you may have heard Lubavitchers speaking about the Rebbe in terms of Mashiach.
Is that a
What's
question?
your question? Do you have a little bit more clarity on where that comes from?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get the question. Would you repeat that?
Sure. My question to you is based on what we just learned about the potential Mashiach, presumptive Mashiach, and confirmed Mashiach. Do you now have a more of an understanding of where it comes from, speaking about the Lubavitcher Rebbe as the potential Mashiach?
Do I have
Well,
a
yeah.
clear understanding?
Sorry?
Is what you're asking is, do I have a clear understanding of why people believe that he was the Mashiach?
Yeah.
Sure,
Yes.
I have a clear understanding of why they believed it, but yet he still turned out not to be the Mashiach.
It is not supposed to be we're not supposed to recognize him as the Mashiach, but someone, which is what Rabbi Shmuley was saying, is that someone who fulfills the criteria for to be presumed, not confirmed. The Lubavitchers presume, and myself included, because I've been studying for 30 years. Well, doesn't seem like it. It seems like I've only been studying since Rabbi Shmuley has been giving this course. But yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so to clarify what Antonina is saying, is that we know that, and we quoted from the Talmud, that it's possible for Mashiach to arise from the dead. Therefore, the Lubavitcher Hasidim, the Lubavitchers, the Chabad Hasidim, are going to say that the Lubavitcher Rebbe filled all the criteria for the presumed Mashiach. So
Yeah.
we can believe that he is going to rise from the dead to become the confirmed Mashiach.
Which is a weird thought, but we can if we try.
Right? There is a possibility of Mashiach rising from the dead to lead us out of exile. Has that happened yet? No. Will anybody, if anybody tells you that Mashiach has already arrived and that we are now in the Messianic era, that is incorrect, and that is not true. The very fact that there are bombs flying in Gaza, and from Gaza, I mean, is the greatest proof that Mashiach has not come. And have all of the Jewish people been gathered? No, we're sitting here, all of us, in the diaspora. Has the third temple being built yet? No, there's the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the site. So Mashiach has not yet come. That's why we're here. That's why we're learning, so that we can do more mitzvahs to make sure that the confirmed Mashiach is going to come. Mashiach is not yet here. So when you hear Lubavitcher saying that the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Nachman Mendel Schneerson, is Mashiach, what they mean is that he is the presumed Mashiach, but not, God forbid, that he is already been the confirmed Mashiach, because that would not fit with the texts. I hope that lends itself to clarity, and we can discuss that further. So now that we know how to tell who he is, we have all of the clear definitions, a very clear litmus test of whether he is the Mashiach or whether he is not Mashiach. We know that in every generation there could be a Mashiach. There is someone who is possible to be the Mashiach. And we know that once we know who that person is, it is proper to rally behind him and continue him. So for us, like for Rabbi Akiva, that meant carrying the sword and the shield of Bar Koziba. For us, what that means is to teach everything we know about Judaism to our friends. That's the war that the Lubavitcher Rebbe led. Was not a physical war, was a spiritual war, was a war, an information war, teaching Jewish people about God, about the beauty of the Torah and the mitzvahs, and helping them become more observant and closer to their roots. So if we wanted to be like Rabbi Akiva and help the one who in our generation is presumed to be Mashiach, and help Mashiach come closer, what we will do is, quote unquote, carry his arms, bear his arms, which means to teach others everything that we know.
Well, the big hint is the one that we're missing. I mean, if Elijah comes, then I'm going to believe that the Mashiach is coming. But I have to see Elijah first.
Okay. You'll see him. there's actually we're almost at the end. There was someone who asked the Lubavitcher Rebbe, can Mashiach come today? How can Mashiach come today if Elijah didn't come yesterday?
Right.
What was the answer?
The answer was, the Lubavitcher Rebbe told him that that verse indeed says that it has to be one day before. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe answered him that every day Elijah goes to Tiberias and announces in quiet that the words in quiet I'm adding myself, but he goes to Tiberias and announces that Mashiach is coming, so that if on the following day the Jewish people will be meritorious and ready for Mashiach to come, they won't have to wait another day. He can just come and say, I already told you guys yesterday, and here comes Mashiach later this afternoon.
That's a bit.
It's a little bit of a stretch. I don't know. I guess we'll find out when it happens.
Yeah.
We'll find out. One thing I can tell you is that when it happens, you'll know about it. And if you don't know about it, it hasn't happened.
Okay.
So here comes one very good question. And before we get there, to summarize, he is not Mashiach, and we are not in the Messianic era until all the boxes are checked. And you cannot say that it has started. You cannot say that the Messianic era has started or begun until everything has been checked.
Mm-hmm.
Every single attempt to say that the Messianic era has started before all the boxes have been checked ended up in extreme disaster. Extreme, devastating disaster.
Excuse me, but you also said this analogy of Shabbos, and that we have to bring Shabbos in early, taste the food of Shabbos on Erev Shabbos. So that's kind of, we can still get a taste of the Messianic era,
Right.
even before Mashiach comes.
Correct. So we can get a taste of the Messianic era, but God forbid to call it the Messianic era until it comes. And in fact, the Lubavitcher Rebbe was very strong about this, that even using the words Messianic era about anything before the temple is being brought itself causes destruction and devastation to Jewish people. So you have today many people who are saying that the fact that we have and here I have to be very sensitive and be very careful about the words that I use. And I trust that I ask forgiveness in advance if I say something that is offensive to anyone. It is extremely beautiful that Jewish people are moving to the land of Israel and that the Jewish people have their own state. It's very nice and pleasant. We have to be very careful not to call it the beginning of the redemption, because by calling it the beginning of the Messianic era, we will only cause death and destruction. Is it a nice thing? Is it a positive thing? Are Jewish people coming back to our homeland? But God forbid to call it that Messiah is already starting to come. Because I heard once an analogy, someone said it's like pregnancy. You can't call a woman half pregnant. Either she is or she isn't. Same thing with a marriage. You have the courtship, you have the dating, you have the engagement period. But they're boyfriend and girlfriend until the moment he takes that ring and puts it on her finger. And as soon as he takes that ring and puts it on her finger, they are husband and wife. There's no half or whole. There's a beautiful relationship that's getting stronger and stronger and stronger. But until they're married, they're not married.
Well put.
So it's now 9:30. If anybody has to go, thank you for joining us. What we are still going to go through today, for those who would like to stay on, is what is the difference between a failed Messiah and a false Messiah? And for those who want to stay after that, we can look at what is the essential point of Mashiach from which everything else stems. So there is Bar Kochva. Yes, Mordechai.
Thank you.
Go
I
ahead,
have to
Mordechai.
leave.
Okay,
watch the
thank you for
recording.
joining us. Yeah,
Yes. Thank
can
you,
watch
everyone.
the recording if you
Have a
like.
good night.
Take care, Mark.
Okay.
Take care.
Take care.
Thanks for joining. We'll see you next week.
Okay.
Rabbi, I have to leave as well. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Okay. Goodbye.
Enjoy. And Leib Moshe, question for you. Did you
Please.
manage to find out if there's anyone else from Westchester who would like to come to the Upshernish on Sunday morning?
No one that I've talked to has indicated that they want to go.
Okay. So it's going to be this Sunday morning at our house. If you need the address, I can, text it to you as well, and you can invite everyone else who fits in the bus to join along with you.
How many people do you expect?
How many people do we expect? It's a great question. Anywhere between 15 and 80.
Okay, that
Anyway,
narrows it down.
Mazel tov in advance, Shmuley. Mazel tov, mazel tov.
Thank you. So, Leib Moshe, if you have to go, we'll let you leave. We are going to now play a video about Bar Kochva.
Thank you
going
very
to-
much, Rabbi.
You're welcome.
Right.
From its inception, the Jewish nation lived with a messianic vision. Even in the worst of times, the Jews anticipated the rise of their star, a savior from the tribe of Judah who would liberate them from foreign subservience and enable religious freedom. 2,000 years ago, Rome stretched forth its mighty branches. In 6 of the Common Era, Judea, the heart of the Jewish homeland, became a Roman province. A few decades later, in the wake of the Great Jewish Revolt, the Romans destroyed the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. That marked the onset of the Jewish nation's exile and persecution. At the same time, the Jews could now anticipate their liberation through the promised Jewish Messiah. In 117 CE, Hadrian became Roman emperor. He toured the empire, erecting pagan temples and promoting Roman beliefs. When he reached ruined Jerusalem in the year 130, he ordered the city plowed over and rebuilt as a Roman city named Aelia Capitolina, with a temple to Jupiter, the chief Roman deity, erected on the site of the Holy Temple on the Temple Mount. This was more than the Jews could take, and in 132 CE, a major revolt began unlike any other. The rebels assaulted the Roman garrison stationed in Judea and succeeded in capturing and holding part of the territory. As Jews from the diaspora flocked to join the cause, Hadrian responded by sending massive reinforcements from Syria, Egypt, and Arabia, but these were similarly defeated. Rome was badly shaken. Hadrian realized the need to muster a truly enormous army in response. He summoned legions from across the globe, including his best general, Julius Severus, who was ordered to travel from Britain with 3 European legions, and units were dispatched from as far as the Danube. Nearly 1/3 of the colossal Roman army was redirected to counter the Jewish revolt. The Jewish army was led by Bar Kokhba, about whom we know precious little.
The name Bar Kokhba wasn't really the man's name. We actually know his name was Shimon Bar Kosiba. But it was called Bar Kokhba because of a biblical verse in the book of Numbers, Darach Kochav Yaakov v'kam shevet Yisrael, that a star will come forth from Jacob and a staff will arise from Israel. And this verse was understood to refer to the Messiah. As far as we know, many Jews believed that Bar Kokhba was indeed the Messiah and that they were supporting the coming of the Messiah in participating in the revolt.
Such views were reinforced by Bar Kokhba's military gains and his liberation of Jerusalem.
What's really amazing is that during the period of Bar Kokhba's rule, he put out coins. On the back side of some of these coins was actually the words Elazar HaKohen, Elazar, the high priest apparently, and this may indicate that they tried to restart sacrifices.
Despite Bar Kokhba's widespread support, The Jewish sages were sharply divided on whether Bar Kokhba was the Messiah.
There were different views among the very important rabbis that we know from the Mishnah. Rabbi Akiva was convinced that Bar Kokhba was the Messiah. The Jerusalem Talmud actually records him as saying, "This is the King Messiah." At the same time, others, like Yochanan ben Torta, were convinced that he couldn't possibly be the Messiah. And he told Rabbi Akiva, "The grass will be growing on your nose," meaning you'll be in the grave before this guy will ever be a Messiah.
Eventually, the tide turned. The legions launched a campaign of systematic annihilation that left Judea almost entirely depopulated. The Roman historian Dio Cassius writes, very few of them in fact survived. 50 of their most important outposts and 985 of their villages were razed to the ground. 580,000 men were slain in the various raids and battles, and the number of those that perished by famine, disease, and fire were past finding out. Bar Kokhba withdrew into the fortress town of Beitar. It was besieged and fell in 135 CE, ending the revolt. Its occupants were slaughtered in an enormous massacre on the 9th of Aleph, the date in the Hebrew calendar on which the first and second temple had been destroyed. Bar Kokhba died there, and Hadrian bitterly oppressed the Jews and the Jewish practice in retaliation.
Some years ago, I was at a scholarly conference about the Bar Kokhba revolt, and an Israeli archaeologist mentioned they had actually already located over 500 of these villages. I imagine that by now, he probably found a lot more. So here we see that these events really occurred, and that this war and this tragedy was as great as we find in our sources.
In the ensuing 2 millennia of Jewish exile, the Jews, unlike the Romans, survived and thrived, returned and rebuilt, and continue to eagerly await the fulfillment of God's promise of redemption.
Okay, so that's in short the story of Bar Kokhba, a man who waged God's battles, was a very pious man. And Rabbi Akiva is, we may have spoken about him in the past, that he is the mainstay for almost all the Jewish literature that we have. Sifra, Sifri, the Midrash, the Mishnah, Jewish law is almost all traced back to Rabbi Akiva. He is one of the greatest links in the chain of Jewish command, in the chain of Jewish law. To think that he was naive and believed in a false Messiah who died or who was killed is very problematic on many levels. So what was going on? What was going on? And like we just said, he was the armor bearer for Bar Kokhba. So,
excuse me,
yeah.
but he didn't fulfill all the other criteria. Because we could say, well, he could come back from the dead, but he did not fulfill all the other criteria.
Right. So that's the question. You're heading into the answer. The question is, what was going on there? Obviously, there's a good answer because we do believe all of the teachings of Rabbi Akiva, and we don't take him for, God forbid, for a fool. So what was going on there? And the answer is that there is such thing as a failed Mashiach, which I don't know where that expression comes from. I don't like the expression, but I would rather call it a unsuccessful Mashiach. There is a Mashiach who is unsuccessful. And let's look at the Rambam. The Rambam, well, let's start it this way, that based on what we've said until now, it makes a lot of sense that Rabbi Akiva rallied behind him and was not mistaken, God forbid. He was someone who fit all the criteria. He was the presumed Mashiach, and therefore it was fitting to go along with him. However, he was not brought to culmination. And the Rambam says, if he succeeds in the above, and he builds the temple in its place, and gathers the dispersed of Israel, he is certainly the Mashiach. And he goes on to say, if he did not succeed to this degree, or he was killed, He is surely not the Redeemer promised by the Torah. Rather, he is like all other worthy kings of the Davidic dynasty who died. So Bar Kokhba was not, God forbid, a false Mashiach leading Jews away from Judaism. God forbid. Bar Kokhba was, like the Rambam says, a worthy king of the Davidic dynasty who started by being the potential Mashiach, moved along to being the presumed Mashiach, and his generation was not yet ready for it, so he was not able to culminate and was not able to rebuild the temple.
Wasn't there a problem with ego there? You know,
A little
humble.
bit. So yeah, there was a
Okay.
sin for which he was killed, and the answer we can get into the whole story. But he killed one of
well,
the
doesn't matter.
rabbis, and because he killed one of the rabbis, it's a long story,
Okay.
and very intricate. But yeah, so let's contrast that. So based on everything that we've learned, was it wrong for Rabbi Akiva to follow and believe in this man Bar Kokhba? Not only was it not wrong, it was exactly what he was supposed to do. If we really believe in the coming of Mashiach, we are going to rally behind and stand together with the one who is to become the Mashiach. And at the end of the day, unfortunately, the generation was not yet ready for it, so it stopped there.
Mm.
Let's contrast that with Lahavdil Shabtai Tzvi. Shabtai Tzvi was a false Mashiach. He was in 350 years ago. Would have been 1404 to 1408. Is that what it was? No. 14.
Anyway, much closer in history.
380 years ago was 1708 or 1608? No, 1648. I'm sorry. 1647, 1648. The Jewish people were in a horrible state. It was, or maybe early 1700s. I think it was in the late 1600s. The Jewish people, was it 1730? Either 1638, 1738, somewhere around there. The Jewish people were being attacked by the famous pogroms of Bogdan Chmelnytsky. Sorry. Oh, okay. He was born in 1626 in Turkey. He was a young, charismatic man. Looking back, historians say that he may have had bipolar or some other mental illnesses. And he was going around convincing everyone that he was Mashiach. He was extremely well-versed in Torah, extremely charismatic, and he won the hearts of many of the Jewish people. And in fact, he was going from town to town because many of the Jewish rabbis saw through him and kicked him out of their cities. However, there were some of the Jewish rabbis who indeed believed in him as the Mashiach. Now, what happened is, how do we know that he was a false Mashiach is a few things. Number one is that he was proclaiming that as Mashiach, he does not have to keep all of the Jewish law.
Oh,
Oh.
gee.
So he was breaking laws of the Torah under the pretense that he's Mashiach, he's higher than that, he doesn't have to keep the Torah. So
But
based on
someone
what we
else to
learned,
do-
that's already a complete disqualification.
Mm.
And he was coming at a time when the Jewish people were extremely vulnerable, where they were being destroyed, pogrom. I mean, we know what the pogroms were like in Eastern Europe, and this was from the worst pogroms. Hundreds of thousands of Eastern European Jews were either killed, their homes were destroyed, the women and the girls were attacked, and it's horrible what happened over there. And Shabtai Tzvi really capitalized on that and said, I am the savior you've all been waiting for. It makes a lot of sense that the Jewish people grabbed onto that straw because they were so devastated. And unfortunately, when he was about 40 years old, I think, in 1666, so that, yeah, when he was in 40 years old, he was given an ultimatum by the king or whatever it was in in Turkey at the time. He was given an ultimatum to either convert to Islam or die, and he converted to Islam. So that shows us very clearly that he was not a Mashiach at all. He was not a potential Mashiach. He was not a presumed Mashiach who failed or was unsuccessful. He was a false Messiah to begin with. So that's the way that we know the difference between somebody who is righteous and worthy, who we should be backing, as opposed to someone who is a emotionally or mentally disturbed individual who is coming. I mean, Jerusalem is full of these people coming and saying that they're Mashiach, and it's unfortunate for them, and they do need help, but the Mashiach, they are definitely not. And this is how we know the difference. How do we know the difference between Bar Kochva and Lahavdil Shabtai Tzvi? We look back at that text from the Rambam. Does he check the boxes or not? If he checks the boxes, good, go along with him. And if he doesn't check the boxes, then we do not. So it makes sense that we need a king, a human being who will rally us all together, fight the wars, and be a strong influence. But what happens once this is all settled? Once Al-Aqsa Mosque is gone and the temple is rebuilt on the Temple Mount, do we still need a Mashiach then? What's going to happen? What's going to happen to him? What's going to happen to the Mashiach at that point? So let's look at page 223, text number 20. The need for Mashiach to serve as a monarch is, as defined by Maimonides, to elevate the true faith, fill the world with justice, destroy the power of the wicked, and wage the wars, the campaigns of God. Accordingly, once Mashiach has successfully influenced all humanity to serve God in unison, and the entire world will be exclusively engaged in divine pursuits, Mashiach's role as a monarch will no longer be necessary to the same degree. At that stage, his primary role will be to teach the people and direct them on the divine path, influencing them as a nasi, a leader, and a teacher. So the king idea will eventually, to a certain degree, fade away, and he will become a mentor and a guide to the Jewish people. So to summarize, we defined how we could tell if he is Mashiach or not, depending on those qualities that we learned from Maimonides. We learned that every generation has a potential Mashiach. We learned that in some generations he becomes the presumed Mashiach, at which point we back him and rally behind him. Once he becomes successful and he is proven to be the confirmed Mashiach, that he ingathered the exiles and built the Holy Temple, at that point we know that the Messianic era has arrived. We learned how to tell the difference between a false Messiah and an unsuccessful Mashiach. And we learned about what happens once he's done his job perfecting the world. That's when his real job starts as a mentor and a guide. Next week, the climax of the course will tackle many questions regarding the redemption, including who will the redemption redeem? What will the world look like post-redemption? Will the dead be reincarnated? What will happen with the 10 lost tribes? Why do we need Elijah prophet to herald the arrival? And will there be apocalyptic events coinciding with the onset of the redemption? Looking forward to see you all there for the sixth class, the final class, as we look forward to what a godly messianic world will look like after we finished all of our work that we started in lessons 2, 3, and 4. We've made the world a perfect place. We found the right Mashiach, we vetted him out, and we know exactly how to find who he is. What is the world going to look like?
Shkach.
So let's go around. What is, Joan, what is the most interesting thing that you learned tonight?
Oh my.
That was all.
I have to think about it. I'm a little overwhelmed. Well, I guess all the things that have, all the criteria that have to be met for
Okay.
the and that he's of a man and a woman. He's a human and doesn't even know it until some point in time that God will, let him know. He'll tap him to be the Moshiach.
Good. Very nice. Thank you, Joan. Auntie Nina, did you learn anything new today?
A lot. That was some of the things that Joan just said. Yeah, that was new learning for me. And I think I have to listen to the recording because there was a lot. There was a lot.
Okay.
Shmuley, have you got a minute? I just want to see. Do you remember? Were you in Mummy's bus minibus when we were going down Bondi Beach, and all your children were in the back seat and looking out at the cafes and people drinking coffee and all that, and someone in the bus, one of the grown-ups, said, "Look out there and see and imagine what it will be like when Mashiach comes. What will these people?" Yes, I could still be drinking their coffees, but what would they be talking about? What would they be discussed? How would they look? How would they dress? Were you in the bus then?
I don't think so. I don't remember that conversation, but it sounds like a fascinating exercise.
I have to ask Mommy how long ago it was. It was, everybody was little in those days. Okay.
Beautiful.
So-
Okay.
Will you be around tomorrow afternoon after 5:30 so I can drop off Mendel's gift and the napkins?
Sure. Yes.
Okay. Okay.
So
good.
Mazel Tov. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mazel Tov.
Thank you very much. And Auntie Nina, hopefully that the Upshurnish is going to be in Jerusalem with the Holy Temple.
Oh man.
And then you can join.
Yes. Unless you have it on Zoom at a convenient time for me. Okay. I should let you go. It's late
Take
where
care.
you are. Yes.
All the
thank
best.
you. Thank
Good
you
night.
very much. Good night,
Thank you.
Joan. Good night.